Welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn Group. I'm Jeff Nugent, and I'm excited about the topic today, talking about internal and hybrid managed programs. And I'm with a pioneer in the industry. And when talking about this topic, I'm here with my good friend, Brandon Moreno, who's the president of EverHive. And Brandon, welcome today. Thank you for coming on the show and talking about internally managed and hybrid managed programs.
Glad to be here. It's good to see you.
Tell me a little bit more about your background. You know, as this president CEO of EverHive, a consulting firm and MSP managed program service provider. Tell us how you got here.
Yeah, it's so my entire background, my entire career has been global human resources and talent acquisition. And what I was finding is there weren't enough strategy partners in the space. And it was becoming frustrating to have a lack of strategy partners that could help achieve certain goals and certain roadmap items that we needed to go to. And so made a pitch. What I saw was a lot of questions coming around self-managed, internally managed programs. How do we do X? How do we do Y? And so made a pitch at CWS to see what the appetite was like for learning more about internally managed programs and self-managed programs. And so fast forward, here we are, 8 years. 8 years going strong.
Fantastic. It's amazing. And the topic of internal and hybrid managed service programs is still hot today, right? And continues to grow. So, you know, we talk about first gen, second gen, third gen. As you grow in the maturity, often companies are thinking about maybe bringing their programs in-house. And that's exactly what you were thinking about as you were on the client side and bringing it in-house. And that's what drove you to start and found EverHive and grow EverHive in the market today. And it's been an amazing journey for you. You know, as a first step though, what is the definition and what is an internally managed program and what is a hybrid program?
Those are good questions. So internally managed program, you think of self-managed. So those are companies that aren't outsourcing it. They're doing it themselves and they're running the contingent workforce programs within the enterprise. No external consulting firm, no MSP. So those are internally managed programs. The hybrid managed programs, there's almost two ways to look at it. There's one of a hybrid MSP, and that's where the MSP is working with the client to do knowledge transfer and do knowledge sharing to get them ready to self-manage or determine if they want to keep it and outsource it. So it's for those clients that either are a first gen or a gen 2 or 3, they're at that stage of we don't know what to do next, but we know we just either have to keep moving or we have to get started. And so that hybrid MSP gives them those options to say, okay, let's design your program and then you can decide later. Then the second part of the hybrid piece is when you have a team that's working with either a consulting firm or the MSP, but it's on a regular basis, right? So they said, hey, we want an MSP. We know we don't want to do this ourselves, but we want to be involved in the MSP and we want to be involved in the evolution of the program. And so that's where you work really lockstep in partnership with the client and the MSP. And so, you know, there's a lot of pros to that, doing it that way.
For sure. Yeah. And you mentioned there's some pros. What are those benefits of the different types of programs, be it an internally managed program or the two different types of hybrid programs?
Yeah, you know, internally managed program, what what we typically find, and I'm sure many people listening to this can relate, is that either procurement or talent acquisition or HR owns the contingent workforce function. Typically on a Gen 1, someone either raises their hand and says, I'll do this, I'll run the program, or someone gets, lucky enough to be designated, hey, congrats, you're now running the contingent workforce program, and they have no experience running a contingent workforce program. So they're kind of in the hot seat of what do I need to look at? But then the other part is there's an established program. They already have a team in place. It might be a combination of procurement folks, talent folks, HR folks, or just a team of one of those who are owning the program, who are running it similarly to a managed service provider. So they're going to have an entire team structure put into place. They're going to have a program manager. They're going to have, a specialist, coordinator, analytics person, all the different things that you would come to expect from an MSP. So the pros with that is you really get to do it the way that you want to do it. You run it, you know where the hiccups are right away, and you're not having to train an MSP on your culture because you already know the culture the way it is and what works and what doesn't work. So that's the pro of an internally managed program of somebody doing it themselves. The pros of the hybrid piece is if you think about the example I gave from a Gen 1, somebody just gets thrown into it and it's a one-person show that might be managing, a $50 or $100 million account. They don't know where to get started. So the hybrid MSP, the pro is they'll do that knowledge transfer. So that person will understand what they need to do, what are some of the first steps that they need to do, what are some of the things they need to start looking at. They're starting to get some visibility around the entire program so that they know what are those next steps that they need to do. So that's the pros of the hybrid is it really gets the program up and running a lot faster, and you're able to evolve it a lot faster because you have experts that are, one, helping evolve the program and also sharing that knowledge with you as you evolve.
Future. What does that look like when the transition or the graduation happens? I like to think of it as a like happy thought that you graduate into an internally managed program. How does that look like typically from the life cycle from start to finish? And then what would be that kind of jumping off point where you say, hey, I think we can graduate and bring this in-house?
So typically what we like to do is we'll set up and say every 2 to 3, let's do this for 2 to 3 years. And that difference really determines on the size. So some programs might be a little bit smaller size and they can be up and ready in 2 years. Some are a little larger, that will be 3 years. And then what's happening is the program is being built out with the graduation. I like that. With the graduation in mind. So from supplier contracts being tri-party contracts to everything being written in that, whether it's transitioning internally or even moving from a different MSP in the future, that it's written into the contracts very nicely and easy that transition can happen. So that's step number one is all the contracts are written in a way that allows the graduation to occur seamlessly. At probably about 6 months before either the 2 or 3 years, you start talking about, okay, if you all are taking it over, you're going to need to be doing X, Y, Z. And all along, you're educating the client from day one. Okay, this is something that, you're going to have to do. This is something that, will be required, as you go through and, they take ownership of the program. So then you have a collaborative decision with the client. All right, based on everything that what is it that you'd like to do? And either those folks have been identified, like the internal team has been built up. There's been other folks that have been identified within the company so that they can either be groomed into those positions. So a client might say, hey, we're ready. we can do this ourselves. And so how we set it up is then we set up post. So it's the graduation happens, but we want to come to the after party for the next 3 to 4 months. And we're making sure that there's stability, there's no interruption. And it's just set up nicely for that. I'm going to keep using that because I love that, the graduation.
So if I'm thinking about setting up a hybrid approach or even an internally managed program, what do, and I haven't decided, and I'm a Gen 1 program, what are some of the things I have to think about in deciding to do an internal managed program or hybrid program versus just a fully outsourced program to an MSP?
So first thing you need to look at is your own internal structure, whether it's a 1-person team or potentially a 3 or to 5-person team. I've known organizations that have had up to almost 40 people internally running it. And so you have to ask, what's your bandwidth? And are you going to be able to be dedicated full-time to this role? It can't just be, hey, I have my full-time TA job or HR job or procurement job, and then I'll do this as some extra. But you need to first figure out if you're able to allocate full-time resource to this internally. If you can't, or you don't have the bandwidth, then that's your first indication that you need to look for an outsource. Then the second question to ask is, if you do go to outsource, how long will I be invested in this project? So is the contingent component going to be a regular part of my job from here on out? Or is it just for a 2 to 3 year window? So that gives you kind of your next understanding of, okay, is it hybrid, or do I just need to fully outsource it? And sometimes you don't know those things until you're going forward. But those 2 things are the first things that I always tell all folks that are saying, we don't know. It's like, do you have the bandwidth? 2, do you have full team support? If you're still considering it internal, do you have that person who's going to be able to coordinate with all the suppliers? Some companies have 1, 2, 3, 500 suppliers. So that's usually a significant amount of resources that are allocated to supplier success. So it's just making sure that you understand all the components when you're making that first decision of whether I can and should manage it internally to whether I outsource it. And do you even have the systems in place? So if you're Gen 1 and you have no VMS, no processes, it's going to be hard for a 1-person show when you have a significant spend. So that's something to think about as well. Are you Gen 1 or Gen 2? So that's the second thing to think about. If you're Gen 2 and you already have systems and processes established, then that's a different conversation.
You got it. Well, Brandon, our time's up here, but man, it's been really interesting having the conversation on talking about internally managed programs or hybrid approach to potentially transition to an internally managed program, or in some cases, it's best to continue down the road with an MSP or an outsourced program. So once again, thank you for your wisdom and expertise on this topic. And it's been amazing having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.